I don't know why we in Free Palestine. I support the Palestinian people. I support any oppressed people in this struggle to get free. I support any oppressed people in this struggle to get free, but please don't come on my live talking about anything other than the African liberation struggle. No disrespect. I wish Palestine the best in this struggle. I pray that they get their land back. I pray that the murders stop, that the genocide is ended. But don't come on this live, because with all due respect, the Palestinians have done nothing to support African people in our struggle. I wish them the best, and my heart goes out to all those children who are being hurt. My heart goes out for the Palestinian children. But with all due respect, no Arab group has ever come to the aid of African people. So please don't jump on my live with that. Please don't jump on this live. Now, there's a lot of coons in the conscious community. Okay? Go jump on their live. Do not jump on King Kong Consciousness Live, pushing the liberation struggle of a non-African group. I stand in solidarity with any oppressed group. I don't care what they color. But I'm dealing with my people's struggle right now. I'm dealing with my people's challenges right now. I'm dealing with my people's issues right now. I'm dealing with African people, only African people, and I'm dealing with it in an unapologetically African way. So the next time you come on here with somebody else's struggle, I'm going to send you to the block party.
Ndewo no Ndibai. It's Nigerian Marks here, back with another video. I want to provide theoretical and political evidence for why black people / global Africans should not be pro-Israel or neutral in regards to Israel's aggression towards Gaza and the West Bank, but towards unity with all Palestinian revolutionary groups. Israeli aggression isn't only towards innocents in Gaza and in the West Bank, but also towards Africans globally, which is something that I'd expect a Pan-African like Dr. Umar and an acclaimed leader of the black community to know. Now, enough with this introductory blurb, and now allow me to explain why Dr. Umar is wrong about intersectionality and why Israel is a white supremacist ethno-state that is an enemy of Africans globally.
אנחנו גזענים כדי לרצות לשמור על החיים שלנו ועל השפיות שלנו. אז אני גאה בלהיות גזענית. אני גאה בלהיות גזענית. אם אני גזענית בשביל לשמור על החיים שלי, אז אני גאה.
My kids, especially my sons, is not safe here in Israel. להפסיק לעשות את זה כבר לסמי הפליטים!
תשים מייקאפ לבן? לא יודע, אני לא יודע, אין לי מושג.
מה אתיופית צריך לעשות? לצאת מהארץ שלנו. כאשר שוטר פוגש חשוד, מטבע הדברים המוח שלו חושד בו יותר מאשר הוא היה חושד בו אילו היה מישהו אחר. זה טבעי.
אחרי שראש ממשלת ישראל מר בנימין נתניהו הבטיח לנו שוב ושוב שהוא יפתור את בעיית המסתננים. אתה יודע, היום אברי יש נתון של אלפי לידות בשנה, שזה נתון מטורף לכל מגזר שנמצא בארץ.
According to a research paper called From a Whisper to a Scream, the Politicization of the Ethiopian Community in Israel, about 141,000 Ethiopians live in Israel as of a 2018 census. Police in Israel are known to beat black migrants, many of which happen to be Ethiopian. This migration and colonization is a result of Western imperialism in Africa. The amount of climate refugees will continue to increase with climate change getting worse in the future. Even worse for these Ethiopian migrants is that they will be surplus population to capital, thus enslaved, unalived, or worse considering the fact that we will be in significantly worse economic positions in the future of climate breakdown. Israeli intelligence was very deep into Ethiopia in the 60s, and Ethiopia was the nerve center of its covert operations elsewhere. And as I quote, the Israeli newspaper Outlook said, Israel maintains relations with many countries in Africa, but there is no doubt that her ties with Ethiopia are of a special kind. This only increased with the growing fear of losing colonial domination in Africa after the colonial revolutions of 1950, 1960, and 1970. Israel supported the fascist Ethiopian military junta, known as the Derg, and its fascist leader, Mengistu, as it continued to escalate its war on Eritrea in early 1975. This also included the transportation of Ethiopian Jews via Operation Moses, which is part of the quote-unquote humanitarian process that continued to displace the Palestinians. This support for Ethiopia was to prevent a pan-Arab/pan-African unification project in the Horn of Africa, and the weapons that Israel sent to this area of Africa plays a vital part in the humanitarian crises that currently plague the region to this day. So Dr. Umar, allow me to ask you, are these people not black? Are these people not your people? Are these people not in need of a Pan-African leader to guide them back to blackness and to get them to see through the veil of Israeli white supremacism? Unfortunately, that man is most certainly not you, Mr. Dr. Umar Johnson. Now, I'm sure some of you guys will say, oh, but Dr. Umar only cares about American black people, and he only cares about his country. Then what about the training that the IDF soldiers have given to American cops, including the knee on the neck killing method, which killed George Floyd and has killed many Palestinians as well? It's almost as if white supremacy and capitalism are all interlinked. Intersectionality is a thing, which is why black people must ally with all oppressed people in our quest to gain our freedom, because our freedom would be all too incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. Material conditions dictate reality, and Dr. Umar's continuous claims of Pan-African excellence, while ignoring materialism, which inspired many Pan-Africanists such as Thomas Sankara, Nelson Mandela, Malcolm X, and Kwame Nkrumah, is an absolute sham and a disgrace to the black community everywhere. So, since Dr. Umar seems to think Israel has absolutely nothing to do with black people, allow me to present several different cases of Israel having to do a lot with black people and why all black people should support not Hamas, but Palestinian resistance. Unfortunately, the IDF has been knees deep in imperialism in the Sahel states such as Nigeria, Burkina Faso, and Niger. This has led to many lynchings of ethnic minorities and Christians in these regions. This is also profitable for Israeli weapons manufacturers who sell weapons to governments in the Sahel states for a massive profit, keeping them dependent on Israeli weapon manufacturers. According to Israel's Dirty Trade in Africa, Diamonds, Weapons, and Settlements, Middle East Monitor, approximately 30% of Zionist Israel's annual income is based on the exportation of polished diamonds. These diamonds largely come from Africa as raw gemstones, using exploited and forced labor under the most deplorable conditions imaginable, sometimes including, or mostly including, the exploitation of child labor. Neo-colonial leadership in many African states benefit personally from these foreign mineral corporations from personal stock earnings, minor partnerships, and money under the table. These diamonds are often picked at gunpoint, with guns given to these regimes by Zionist manufacturers of weapons. Israel, unfortunately, is not new in the realm of sub-Saharan African imperialism and the lynchings of ethnic minorities, as they unfortunately contributed to the Holocaust of the Igbo people, my ethnicity in Nigeria, which killed anywhere from 4 to 6 million people, with the list ongoing due to the Islamic jihadist groups funded by Israeli weapons. Israel is prevalent in many of the worst atrocities on the African continent in the past 70 years. They funded Hutu militias in their genocide of the Tutsis during the Rwandan genocide, alongside Belgium and Germany. This was a capitalist imperialist ploy to exploit new markets for greater and greater profits. Israel also played a heavy hand in the rise of Ugandan despot Idi Amin. Milton Obote, a Pan-Africanist leader who intended to nationalize private companies and condemned Israel's aggression towards Sudan and Egypt, was unfortunately overthrown by Idi Amin, who later turned against Israel and the same Western powers who backed him. The attempts at overthrowing him after, and the attempts by Amin to stop said coups, resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths to the Ugandans. In the late 1960s, Israel sold weapons to Sudanese rebels called the Ayana. This organization eventually became part of the organizations currently destabilizing Sudan now, and the sales of weapons to Sudanese rebels has continued for Israel. This is in order to strengthen anti-Palestinian and anti-Iranian factions at the expense of the Sudanese people. Israel also routinely trained South African Boers in their journey to continue to have a de facto apartheid state in South Africa, with many of the remnants from the old apartheid system still present in all but name. Not to mention Israel being one of the biggest supporters of the South African apartheid until resistance became too expensive to support upon international condemnation. This is not to be confused with South Africa's current condemnation of the Israeli genocide in Gaza, but I will go more into detail on the reasons for this later. Unfortunately, Israel continues to punish others for the crimes committed against it in the 1940s by Germany in the Holocaust, but not Germany or the Western powers who supported Nazi Germany's rule, but Arabs and Africans, people who had nothing to do with Germany's conquest of the Jews and ultimately their genocide of Jewish people. During the 1970s, another settler colonial occupation state, Rhodesia, now known as Zimbabwe, was fighting its bush war against its revolting African population. Israel sold weapons and military equipment to the white government of Rhodesia during that bush war, eventually granting them a license to manufacture their own. Israeli billionaire Dan Gettler has faced international condemnation for his human rights abuses in the Congo. This includes forced child labor, funding of paramilitary militia groups in order to destabilize the Congo for their resources. This is also after Israel has offered to voluntarily migrate, quote-unquote, Palestinian people to the Congo. This is due to Congolese people and miners in the Congo being surplus to the requirements of capital, i.e., not profitable to keep them alive. So they will be worked to death and starved in order to recreate or help create profitable conditions once again. Most of these diamonds that Israel mines come from African countries such as South Africa, Liberia, Congo, Ivory Coast, among other African countries.
To America, Mr. Mandela. I'm Ken Edelman. Those of us who share your struggle for human rights and against apartheid have been somewhat disappointed by the models of human rights that you have held up since being released in jail. You've met over the last 6 months 3 times with Yasser Arafat, who you have praised. You have told Gaddafi that you share the view and applaud him on his record of human rights and his drive for freedom and peace around the world. And you have praised Fidel Castro as a leader of human rights and said that Cuba was one of the countries that's head and shoulders above all other countries in human rights, despite the fact that documents at the United Nations and elsewhere show that Cuba is one of the worst. I was just wondering, are these your models of leaders of human rights? And if so, would you want a Gaddafi or an Arafat or a Castro to be a future president of South Africa?
One of the mistakes which some political analysts make is to think that their enemies should be our enemies. we can and we will never do. We have our own struggle, which we are conducting. We are grateful to the world for supporting our struggle. But nevertheless, we are an independent organization with its own policy. And the attitude of every country towards, our attitude towards any country is determined by the attitude of that country to our struggle.